Good morning, everyone. As was mentioned in the introduction, I lead the go-to-market in Germany, so I can tell you a lot about customers in Germany who've publicly shared net zero targets, but they've never actually thought about carbon dioxide removal. So I can only echo what was mentioned in the previous presentation. I will talk about our corporate strategy, but also how we engage with customers and partners, but also what our global programs like CDR actually are. And I think we all agree that if we want to achieve a more sustainable future, it will require unprecedented collaboration on a local level, national level, international level, but it will also require unprecedented collaboration with the public and the private sector working together. And there's a couple of topics that I want to touch base on. One is actually how do you leverage AI for sustainability, but also what are the sustainability implications of growing AI? So that's one topic I will talk about. And another topic I want to talk about is really sustainability regulation. So what's happening in the European and the German market. So maybe you heard about CSRD. That's the major topic that I'm working on in the German market. And ultimately, it's really about what we as Microsoft are doing. And these are typically the three dimensions that we as Microsoft focus on when we talk about sustainability. So the first one is really how do we get our house on order and how do we deliver on our targets. I will talk more about our targets in a second, but I can already tell you that we are definitely thinking about CDR and we are also massively investing. You will see in a second we are one of the biggest, in fact, actually the biggest buyer of carbon dioxide removal as of today. The second aspect that is really key for us is customer sustainability. So that's my main job. I'm not part of our sustainability team, but I'm working with customers and partners. And I can tell you it's a very dynamic and interesting market. So I work with big STAX 40 companies, so the big ones, but also German Mittelstand, so German SMC customers. They are also heavily affected by regulation like CSRD, and it's a totally different sort of perspective on the regulatory market, and I will share some learnings from working with those customers. And ultimately, it's really about global sustainability, so I will talk about our CDR portfolio. I will also talk about our Climate Innovation Fund that we launched in 2020, and why we think this is actually having a global impact. I want to kick it off with the work that we've done in the past and that we are doing today. So we actually set our first emission reduction targets in 2009. And I just heard in the first presentation a lot of talk about internal carbon fee. So we were, I think, one of the first companies who've actually instituted a carbon fee very early. It's a super powerful instrument that I actually, at least in the German market, don't see a lot of customers using at all. It's very effective for collecting money, but of course also incentivizing more sustainable behavior when we talk about emissions. Secondly, 2020 was really the key year for us to formulate and publicly share our sustainability targets, and we'll talk about that in a second. And we also launched our Climate Innovation Fund with over $1 billion that is going into different companies. As I said, carbon dioxide removal is key for us. So we started in 21-22, where we removed already 2.5 million metric tons of carbon. And I will share more details about how we approach it and some of the challenges that we are seeing. Now, 2025 is really key for us because you can see here we have the goal to operate with 100% renewable energy. Now, that might sound trivial depending on the sector you're working in, but for us it's a big challenge because we are one of the biggest data center providers, hyperscalers. So getting 100% renewable through PPAs across the entire data center infrastructure, not only in Europe but globally, is a big challenge, and I will talk about that. And secondly, it's not only about carbon. So there's a big issue when it comes to carbon tunnel vision. We are also trying to protect more land than we use through our data centers and actually our own buildings globally. 2030 is really key for us. So we said in 2020 that we want to be carbon negative until 2030 across all three scopes. Now that's interesting because when I talk to German customers, they tell me, yeah, we've already done this. And then of course the question is, does it include scope 3? Most of the time it doesn't. And for us, it's a big challenge because Scope 3 is obviously the largest portion of our emissions, and I will double click on that in a second. Now, I talked about also biodiversity and land protection. We also set out the goal that we want to be water positive by 2030. Again, if you're operating data centers, it still requires a lot of water. There are a lot of innovative technologies that are coming into the market, but still we want to replenish more water in 2030 than we're actually using. And ultimately, I think that's actually even a step further, and I so far haven't seen that from any other company that I'm working with. We also said there's a historic responsibility. So until 2050, we actually want to remove the historic direct emissions, Scope 1 and Scope 2, since the foundation of Microsoft. We are still a rather young company. In 1975, Microsoft was founded. So we're also taking over responsibility here. Let's double click on the emissions. So for us, even with all the data centers and all the energy that is going into it, Scope 2 is only 2%. So we are working a lot on reducing our emissions in Scope 2, and I will share some insights here in a second. But Scope 3 is really the biggest challenge for us. I mean, it's also true if you are an FSI company, if you are working in tech. But what's interesting, at least in Germany, there's actually quite a bit of companies where Scope 1 is way, way higher, much, much higher. And obviously also Scope 2 with a large manufacturing base is still a very big topic for most of the German customers I talk to. Now, as you can see here, obviously Scope 3, category 1 and 2 are really key for us. And that includes a lot of topics and a lot of sort of materials and products that we are buying. It includes the entire data center infrastructure, so server racks, cables, building material. But obviously, it also includes the components for the hardware that we are manufacturing, so Xbox, Surface laptops, and so on. I think what's also very interesting is category 11. So if you or your kids are playing Xbox, requires energy, typically equals emissions. That's also part of our emissions. So working on energy-efficient devices, whether it's a laptop, whether it's an Xbox, is key, and I will share some more work in a second. If we move on, so Scope 2, as I said, is only 2%, but still it's super important for us, especially in the context of AI and a lot of demand for cloud services globally. We've been an early proponent of PPAs globally. You can actually see here that in 2021, Amazon and Microsoft were leading. And we also believe it's a key signal to the market that there is a need for renewable energy globally. So we continue to sign PPAs. You might have heard about Microsoft's investments in Germany. I think 2 weeks back, we are going to build up new data center capacities, 3.2 billion investment. And obviously, we need green energy. You heard about the 2025 goal before to deliver on our goals. You can also see here, and as a German, that's always a very critical topic. We are also collaborating with very innovative companies like Helion, so fusion power. That's sort of a bit on the future. This one is supposed to actually deliver energy in 2028. But you can really see it's a portfolio of different companies we are working with. We also signed a deal with Vattenfall in Sweden a couple of years back. But as I mentioned, Scope 2 is not really the biggest issue. It's really Scope 3. And there's a couple of aspects that I want to highlight. So we still are producing a lot of devices, Xbox, Surface laptops. So reducing our emissions across the entire supply chain is key. So we are working with our top suppliers to make the move to 100% renewable energy. There's actually lots of progress. But as you know, there's heavy dependencies on Tier 2, Tier 3, and so on. So it's a tricky endeavor. Secondly, device efficiency. I briefly mentioned it. It's a huge topic for us because if we can't deliver there, delivering on our Scope 3 targets is going to be incredibly difficult. Decarbonization of transportation, again, super important. Server racks are typically, again, delivered around the globe. We have data centers everywhere, and we are striving to actually switch to more sustainable transportation modes as we speak. The fourth one is, again, very interesting. So we really think holistically, how can we actually buy less carbon intense materials when building data centers, but also when building our new campuses. So we actually built a new campus in Silicon Valley, I think 3 years back. We're using a lot of woods, and that's a key consideration. And you will also see that some of the work that we are doing with the Climate Innovation Fund is actually going into the work we do with carbon reduction in buildings. And ultimately, that's sort of the intersection of circular economy and emissions. We introduced our first cloud circular center in Amsterdam, I think 3 years back. We are now expanding them, and we can actually reuse and recycle up to 90% of server components. That's, again, key for us, because if we can actually reuse those components, emissions will go down. And at the same time, it's obviously also a way for us to save costs when ramping up new data centers. Now, let's talk about customer sustainability. And as I said, that's really the area that I'm focused on. I'm only working with German customers, so maybe there's something specific about them. But I think some of the learnings are probably also true and relevant for the UK market. And what I actually really like is this quote from the Microsoft CEO, because a lot of times when I work with customers and we talk about CSRD, by the way, who knows what CSRD stands for? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Don't be so shy. A lot of people. So Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, if I talk to customers, 95% of the time it's actually Corporate Sustainability Directive reporting and how to get there. And most of the time when we ask customers about the about the tool they are using or they were using in the past, it's a Microsoft tool. It's Microsoft Excel, which we obviously love, but it was not designed for CSRD reporting or emission accounting. But it's still the case in most of the occasions when I talk to customers, and I think building this digital muscle for sustainability is super, super important. So when I talk to finance organizations, they've been investing in their ERP systems for 40 years, they got tons of resources, they're all really proud. Then you go to the next door and you talk to the sustainability team, and it's Excel, and like every now and then 2 persons from the marketing team are now supposed to deliver the CSRD report, which is not going to work. But that's, sharing from my daily work and daily experience, something that I see, and that's why we believe at Microsoft that investing into those digital technologies, of course also infused by AI, is key. And this one is underlined here. So we talk a lot about regulation and compliance, and I think we all agree it's important. Also, your auditor is going to tell you, at least in Germany, that it's very important that the data is accurate and they understand the processes and the governance behind it. But let's not forget about other use cases that also do play an important role. So this, improved business efficiency and reduce cost was super relevant in Germany 2 years back with the energy crisis and so on. And there were a lot of customers who relied on our technology like digital twins to actually drive down costs in their operations. Obviously, it's also about meeting stakeholder expectations. So investors, customers are getting more and more interested. So I can tell you I get probably on a daily basis 20, 30 customers asking about the sustainability of our offerings. That could be cloud infrastructure, could be what are the emissions associated to a Teams call, what does happen to my emissions when I switch off the camera. So there's a lot of questions that actually come into my direction, but obviously that is also happening with other customers. And I think the last aspect is, at least in Germany, very often forgotten because everyone is so focused on being compliant when it comes to CSRD. In Germany, we have this local supply chain act. It's called Lieferketten-Sorgfaltspflichtengesetz. So if someone can pronounce it, I owe them a coffee. But let's not forget about the business opportunity that is also behind using tech for more sustainable institutions, sustainable products and services. And for us, and I still get that question quite a lot, that was actually one of the key motivations because we know it involves a lot of technology, involves a lot of data, and we think we are actually quite good at that, why we introduced a portfolio of cloud for sustainability solutions. And I actually want to start with this one here. So Emission Impact Dashboard is actually a solution that any customer of ours can use to tell you about your Scope 3 emissions when you're using the Azure Cloud or M365. And I can tell you 2 or 3 years back, maybe every second week a customer was interested in understanding what are the emissions when using Azure M365. Dramatically changed over the last years. So I'm getting a lot of questions, as I just said, about the emissions of using Azure M365. There's a lot of green IT teams, at least in Germany, now popping up. So green software development, how do I choose the most sustainable data center? How do I manage my application? Can you actually help me in the cloud environment to better understand what some sustainability levers are when looking at my application landscape? But we've also introduced applications for actually measuring emissions, water and waste data. And we recently introduced so-called sustainability data services. That's probably more an offering for data science and data engineering, but it actually happens quite often to me that I talk to the IT organization and I ask them, what's your role in supporting CSRD reporting and helping the company be more compliant? And honestly, very often they don't even know who's taking care of that inside their company. And I think that's not good, and we definitely have to change that, because if we talk about CSRD reporting in Europe, it will definitely require a very flexible architecture to collect up to 1,000 data points across your entire organization. And that's, again, something where we as Microsoft want to help. Obviously, there's AI everywhere. You might have heard about Copilot functionalities in the Microsoft portfolio. So we now also added this to our product sustainability manager, where you can actually use natural language to query your CSRD data, to create reports, or understand better how to create your first emission report inside your organization. Who knows about this company, Schaeffler? Okay, 2 persons, 3 persons, 4 persons. Key automotive supplier, but also super important for the renewable energy industry globally. And this is a customer case that I'm really proud of because we worked together for a long time, and it was a very typical situation. They had defined a climate action plan. They had this, not very flexible document, and then it was really about implementing a system that helps them to steer the entire organization towards this goal. And that's what we did. We sat together, we did a hackathon, and we actually created inside Sustainability Manager a system that allows them to drill down what's the emission impact of, for example, buying green steel in China, what's the contribution of project A, B, C towards our sustainability goals. And I think it's a real game changer for them, and we are really proud of this collaboration. You can see here on the right side, it says sustainable transformation through collaboration and road to net zero enabled by digitization. And what was interesting again here is that the team we worked with was a combo of sustainability team and enterprise architecture. So if you're working in sustainability and you're worried about reporting, talk to your IT team, to your enterprise architects, and make them your best friends, because I honestly think they will be key for you. And maybe just another remark, because I see that quite often. There's a lot of providers in the market that have a very nice UI and interface. But then if you drill down and you understand what CSRD requires, you actually realize that most of the data has never been captured. So it's not about a system where to put the data in, but it's actually understanding where do I get the data, what are the providers in the market that can help me to get data on biodiversity. That's a very frequent example in Germany where most of the companies have never captured data. And now after this so-called DMA, double materiality analysis, they realize they need to report biodiversity data and the implications of their company, and they haven't done so. Speaking of AI, we published a white paper last year in November with our CSO, where we clearly highlight some of the use cases where we think AI can help, but we also talk about the sustainability implications of AI, so energy consumption, water usage, and so on. I would definitely encourage you to have a look. One of the key themes that is emerging from this paper is that I think we all agree technology is key for achieving our sustainability targets, but we argue that AI can definitely dramatically expand the possibilities. And how is that? So first of all, we argue that measuring, predicting complex systems, and that could be a weather forecast, it could be monitoring of biodiversity systems, is definitely an area where AI can help. I talked about new low-carbon material that we are trying to integrate into the building of data centers and our own facilities. So there were some recent studies that really showed impressive results like really shortening the time that is needed to come up with entire new material structures that are lower on carbon. And ultimately, the area that is closest to me, I spend a lot of time talking to sustainability reporting teams who are really tired and are actually quitting their jobs. Because they are so overwhelmed by the regulation, they are so overwhelmed by the lack of resources inside their organization, they are so overwhelmed by using Excel and maybe some other tools. And we argue that AI can definitely help there in building those reports, getting more insights out of the data that is in the system. And here's a couple of examples. So Fido is actually a company that we've been partnering up with to detect water leakages in London. Our CSO met them last year. She came over to London. I think a very interesting case study. Second example is, I think, a key question: how do we decarbonize the grids? And we argue that AI can help to actually get more renewables onto the grid, and ultimately, as I said before, support sustainability practitioners across the entire Microsoft stack, but obviously that could also be AI infused into any other sustainability tool. We also published a lot of research, and I would encourage you to have a look if you're interested in the topic about the sustainability implications of AI. So that's one of the first questions I'm always getting. So how sustainable is it? How sustainable is Copilot and M365 and so on? And I think there's no definitive answer as of today. I think that is also part of the truth, that there's still a lot of research going on. But we published a lot of research, and some of the learnings are, first of all, it really depends when and where you train the model. So obviously, the amount of renewable energy is not the same in Germany versus Saudi Arabia versus China. So it really depends where do you train the model. Second question is, how large is the model? So we're also talking increasingly about smaller models. Of course, again, PPAs are key for us. And ultimately, it's also about innovation that is happening on the water cooling side, but also on the GPU side that we are taking into account. Last aspect of my presentation is really global sustainability. And I'm really glad that the previous presentation was about CDR, so I don't have to explain what CDR actually stands for and some of the stats. But we are one of the companies that is massively investing into CDR. And I think there were some other numbers before, but I had a look at this report, I think 2 weeks back from CDR FYI, and you can see that the growth in carbon removal purchases, so not deliveries, but purchases, is strongly growing. I think the previous speaker showed there's a clear lag in terms of where we need to get. So Microsoft has the ambition of 5 million tons in 2030, carbon removal projects. But you can definitely see there's a strong uptake. And what you can also see on the right, that we, as of today, are by far the biggest purchaser of carbon removal projects. This includes collaborations with Ørsted, but also with smaller companies. We've actually published our third edition of our learnings when we talk about carbon dioxide removal. So we argue there's a lot of progress that we see in the market, increased quality, increased demand, more certifications coming into the market. And you can see some of the examples here. We announced a couple of other announcements over the last weeks. And what you can see here, it's a combination of DAC, so direct air capture, Climeworks, well-known company, Neustag, another Swiss company, but also afforestation projects. And that's really key for us. Previous speaker also mentioned it. It's a combination of different projects that have short-term, mid-term, and long-term durability. And obviously, they also come with a different cost that we need to consider. Last aspect that I want to talk about is really our Climate Innovation Fund. So we are investing into a lot of companies. This includes geothermal energy. It also includes companies investing into the production and scale-up of sustainable aviation fuels. We are also using it on our own. And for us, it's always key that it needs to be climate impact. It needs to be an underfunded market. It was slightly different in 2020 than today. Shared alignment to our strategy, and ultimately it's about climate equity. So companies should also benefit. Also developing countries should benefit from those investments that we are making. We've allocated $700 million so far. It's a $1 billion climate fund, and we hope to actually allocate the remaining 300 over the course of this year. In closing, for us at Microsoft, the first dimension is really getting our own house in order, delivering on our targets. So I talked about Scope 3, really key for us. Data sustainability, especially in the context of growing AI demand, is key. I talked about carbon removal. And as I said, let's not fall into the trap of carbon tunnel vision, because I have a lot of customers only talking about emissions and they forget about biodiversity or water implications. Secondly, my major topic, data platforms for sustainability are key. Flexible architecture. Let's not only focus on compliance, but also other use cases. And I think AI can definitely help here. And lastly, I'm also leading our impact fund in Germany. It's just incredible to see the amount of innovation happening. Germany just passed a new legislation last week when it comes to CCS, carbon capture and storage. And it's just impressive to see what's happening there. And I mean, we are happy to invest, but I think we all agree that definitely also needs to be more investments coming into the market to scale this even further. And with that, I'm going to be here for the rest of the day. Please reach out if there's any question.
Christoph, thank you very much indeed. It is a busy room, so I'm expecting a lot of questions. If we can keep them pretty short and sharp, I'd be very grateful. Taking any questions from the room now? After that build-up. There we go. We go just in the middle here, if we can get the microphone. I appreciate some of the sessions are overlapping slightly. If we could just let the mic get through, please. There we go, just in the middle. Thank you.
Brilliant presentation. Learned a lot. Outside of Europe, is there a similar focus on the practices that you guys seem to be rolling out here, particularly in Germany?
Sorry, can you repeat again?
Outside of Europe,
yeah.
What's happening outside of Europe? Because the legislation we know is the big hammer sitting on top of Europe's head, and everybody else is sort of tagging along and playing the wait and watch game.
Yeah.
What are you guys doing outside?
So, I mean, first of all, we are an American company, but we are also affected by CSRD. And that's also true for a lot of non-European companies who still think that they are not affected, but they are actually affected. So even companies operating outside of Germany or the EU, they need to comply. For us itself, I think getting those PPAs for our global data center infrastructure is definitely a challenge. So, I mean, it's just a fact that some of the countries we are operating in are not so aggressive when it comes to the investments into renewable infrastructure as some other countries are, and Germany currently is. So I think that's a big topic, and I think ultimately it's also about this whole topic. So there's a lot of internal discussions also when it comes to AI. So how can we make this more sustainable? Where do we see the biggest demand? What are some of the user behaviors also when it comes to the demand of AI? And that's also being taken into account.
Okay, question there on the far side, just in the red. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the presentation. My company does use your services, but clearly not to its fullest extent. We definitely don't use Copilot, so it's a very targeted question. Do you have support, follow-up support for existing customers to educate them, and especially their IT teams, to start doing this type of reporting, for CSRD, for internal purposes as well?
Yeah, so it depends a bit on the size. So if you have an account team that is supporting you as a client, it's a bit easier because they typically know all these different applications and they can help you. But if not, we also have a counterpart in the UK that obviously could help with those questions. And also with the CSRD reporting, which is early stage when it comes to our products at this point.
We're also based in Germany, so maybe we can...
Yeah, then we can directly connect.
Any more questions from the room? Because we have plenty from the digital audience, which I'll go to... No, I'll go to our digital audience. Thank you very much, everyone here. Next question is from Philip Wallet. Do you consider changes in the engineering design for your hardware to improve their suitability for circular economy?
So that's not really the area that I'm focused on, but I think it's definitely a key concern for us. So we also formulated a goal to be zero waste until 2030, and reusability of server racks is key. But I think what's also important to mention here, that's probably also an ask to our suppliers, because typically, we are buying the server racks from the big ones. Of course, we are also doing a lot of customization, but the data center itself is built by Microsoft, but a lot of the components are actually procured. So we also are constantly working with them to talk about reusability. Same is also true, obviously, for our hardware that we are selling, right to repair.
Okay, and one final question from the digital audience. For Scope 3, how are you able to calculate the footprint of the software the company's placing on the market, like Excel, for example? How do you go about calculating that?
So we offer those M365 emission dashboards that actually explain very much in detail how we calculate the emissions. So I would recommend to have a look at them. It's actually differentiated by workload. So Teams is included, SharePoint, and all the other components. I mean, it's a tricky endeavor. We have typically data for the respective customer usage, for the energy that is being used, energy mix, and so on. For Scope 3, as always, it's a bit more tricky, but I would definitely recommend to have a look at the emission impact dashboards. It's a very long description of how we calculate the emissions.
Okay, Christoph, you've been so generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining us, and thank you for your questions.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.